Your mates will always be there. Your family will always be there. The band will always have another. When you're young, everything feels permanent. Your mates will always be there. Your family will always be there. The band will always have another record to make, another joke to tell, another argument to get over. You don't stop to imagine that one day you'll be the fellow sitting in a quiet room looking back at faces that belong to another lifetime. I've lived a very loud life, louder than I ever expected. There were screaming girls, airplanes, hotel rooms, television cameras, stadiums, gold records, arguments, reunions, funerals, marriages, children, grandchildren, and more drum kits than I could possibly count. But when you get to my age, the noise doesn't stay with you as much as people think. People do. If you asked me to name 5 people I love most, I wouldn't choose them because they were the most famous. I wouldn't choose them because they made the biggest records or stood beside me in the most important photographs. I'd choose the people who knew who I was when the room went quiet. And the first one takes me all the way back to Liverpool. My mother, Elsie, before there was Ringo Starr, before anybody shouted my name outside a theatre, I was Richard Starkey, a sickly little boy from Dingle who spent far too much of his childhood looking at hospital ceilings. People sometimes rush through those early years to get to the Beatles. But when illness takes that much of your childhood, you remember who sat beside the bed. My mother did. I was 6 when my appendix burst. Peritonitis followed, and I was terribly ill. Later came tuberculosis, more hospital time, more months away from school, more of that strange childhood feeling that life was happening somewhere else without you. When you're a child, you don't understand fear the way adults do. You understand faces. You know which face makes you feel safe. For me, that was Mum. She had already been through plenty. My father had left when I was very young. Money wasn't something we had much of. Life in Liverpool could be hard without anybody bothering to make a speech about it. You just got on with things. And Mum got on with things. She worked, she worried, she visited, she kept going. I think I learned something from her. Before I ever learned a proper drum pattern, you can be frightened and still show up. That's love, really. People imagine love as a grand declaration. Sometimes love is a woman taking the bus to see her son in a hospital ward. Sometimes it's bringing a bit of normal life into a place that smells of medicine. Sometimes it's making a child believe there will be something waiting for him when he finally gets home. There was. Music came into my life partly because illness had taken so much else away. In hospital, I got a taste of percussion. I didn't know it would become my passport out of Liverpool. I just knew hitting something in time made sense to me. Mum never laughed at the dream. That matters. A lot of people love you after the world decides you're worth loving. The rare ones love you before there is any evidence. She knew Richard before Ringo existed, and I think every version of me that came afterward was still trying in some way to make that boy and his mother proud. The second person is Paul. Now, Paul McCartney and I have had one of those relationships that people on the outside love to simplify. They want a headline. Were you close? Did you argue? Who was right? Who was wrong? Why did the Beatles break up? What did Paul say? What did John say? What did George say? After more than 60 years, you realize relationships aren't headlines. They're weather. They change. They storm. They clear. They come back. Paul and I were different from the beginning. He was always thinking ahead. Another song, another arrangement, another idea, another take. I was a drummer. I wanted to find the pocket, make the song feel right, and perhaps get something to eat before midnight. There were times his energy could drive you mad. There were also times it saved the record. That's the truth of loving someone you've worked with closely. The very thing that annoys you can be the same thing you admire most. Paul cared. He cared enormously. He could hear a finished record before the rest of us had even worked out what we were doing. He'd come in with an idea, and sometimes we'd roll our eyes, but very often there was something in it.
The final Beatles years were difficult. We had families, business problems, different musical instincts, and people pulling us in different directions. We were growing apart while the world demanded we stay the same. There were moments when Paul and I frustrated each other. I'm sure I frustrated him too. But here's the part people forget. After the Beatles ended, life kept going. And so did we.
That means more to me now than any argument. You lose some people because of one terrible moment. With Paul, there were enough years, enough affection, enough history to survive the terrible moments. We've played together again. We've laughed together again. We've stood on stages where one look was enough to bring back 50 years in half a second. That's what happens with someone who knew you when the impossible was still impossible. Paul doesn't only remember Ringo Starr. He remembers the clubs, the vans, the bad food, the long sessions, the jokes nobody else would understand, the looks across the studio when something suddenly clicked. There aren't many people left who can do that. When I see him now, I don't spend my time thinking about who wrote what or who said what in 1969. I think we're still here. Two lads from Liverpool who went through something no human beings were rarely prepared to go through. Fame that big changes the temperature around you. Everybody wants something. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody thinks they know the story better than the people who lived it. Paul lived it. So did I. And beneath everything else, that creates a kind of love that is difficult to explain. The third person is John. John Lennon could make you laugh when you absolutely shouldn't be laughing. That's one of the first things I remember when I think about him. Not the round glasses, not the headlines, not the political arguments, not even the songs, the humor. John had a way of looking at something serious and finding the one angle nobody else had noticed. Sometimes it was brilliant, sometimes it was cruel, sometimes it was both. But when he liked you, when he trusted you, there was warmth underneath all that sharpness. People ask what John was really like. There wasn't one John. That was the thing. He could be loud and quiet, confident and terribly insecure, affectionate and distant. He could walk into a room and take over the whole place, then suddenly seem as though he wanted to disappear from it. I understood more of that than I probably said at the time. All of us were being turned into characters by the outside world. John the genius, Paul the charming one, George the quiet one, Ringo the funny drummer. But none of us were that simple. John knew that. He could tease me, and he did, but I never felt that he saw me as lesser. That's important, because I was the last one to join. John, Paul, and George already had years of history before I became part of the group. I could have felt like the outsider forever. I didn't. Once I was in, I was in. John's affection wasn't sentimental. Sometimes it came through a joke, a song, or simply by wanting you there. Then came the end of the band. People imagine everything ended in one dramatic explosion. It didn't. It frayed. Business, resentment, exhaustion, individual ambition, hurt feelings. We all played our part. Afterward, there was time. Not enough, as it turned out. That's the thought that still gets me. You always think there'll be another dinner, another phone call, another chance to laugh about how ridiculous everyone had been. Then one night, in December 1980, there wasn't. I don't think you ever completely understand news like that. The world lost John Lennon. I lost John. Those are different losses. The world mourned the voice, the songs, the symbol. I mourned the man who had been in the van, in the studio, in the hotel, in the middle of the madness beside me. That's the price of surviving someone famous. Everybody remembers the public person, and your grief keeps reaching for the private one. I still think of him in flashes. A look, a joke, a ridiculous comment, the sound of his voice when no microphone was on. That's how people remain alive inside you, not as monuments, as moments. The fourth person is George. George Harrison and I had a friendship that got deeper after the Beatles, which surprises some people. Maybe it shouldn't. Inside a band that enormous, you're never just friends. You're colleagues, business partners, performers, prisoners of the schedule, brothers, competitors, sometimes even opponents. Everything is mixed together. Afterwards, some of the noise disappeared, and George and I could simply be George and Ringo. He was younger than me, but there were times he seemed centuries older. George was searching for answers long before most of us admitted we had questions. He cared about spirituality, purpose, what happens beyond ego, beyond success, beyond applause. When you're in your 20s and the world is screaming your name, those are unusual things to be thinking about. But George was unusual. He could also be very funny. People hear spiritual and imagine somebody floating around the garden, speaking in whispers. Not George. He had a wicked sense of humor. That's one of the things I miss most. He could make a comment so dry you weren't sure whether you'd been insulted until 5 minutes later. After the Beatles, we worked together in different ways. He wrote songs for me, we played together, we stayed connected. And when my own life was getting out of control, friendships like his mattered. There are years I'm not proud of.
Drinking had gone from something social to something destructive. Drugs were part of that world too. Barbara and I eventually reached the point where we had to change or lose everything that mattered. Money doesn't protect famous people from falling apart. It only gives you nicer places to do it. George understood something about human weakness. He wasn't perfect, and he never pretended to be.
But he had a way of reminding you there was more to life than whatever chaos you had created around yourself. Near the end of his life, that became even clearer. When someone you love is seriously ill, all the old nonsense becomes very small very quickly. Nobody cares about chart positions. Nobody cares about who won an argument 30 years earlier. You care whether they're comfortable. You care whether they know you're there. You care whether there's still time for one more laugh. The last period with George is difficult for me to talk about because it reminds me how fragile all of us are, even the people the world has decided are immortal. There was a moment during one of our final meetings when I had to leave because my daughter was dealing with a serious health problem. George himself was terribly ill, yet his instinct was still to offer help. That was George. His body was failing him, and he was still thinking about someone else. How do you forget something like that? You don't. When he died in 2001, another piece of that old world disappeared. But with George, I often feel something different from simple sadness. I feel gratitude, because we had the chance to become friends again outside the machine. Not Beatles, not legends, just two old mates who had survived something extraordinary. And then there is Barbara. If the others connect me to where I came from, Barbara is the person who helped me survive where I ended up. I met Barbara Bach while we were making Caveman. Now, if you're expecting me to say that angels sang, and I immediately knew we'd spend the rest of our lives together, life wasn't quite that tidy. But there was something, there was ease. And for someone whose life had been noise for so long, ease was powerful. By then, I'd already lived several lives. Liverpool, the Beatles, the breakup, solo records, parties, travel, divorce, success, confusion, and I had become very good at looking as though I was enjoying myself. That's a dangerous skill. Because if everybody thinks you're having a wonderful time, fewer people ask whether you're all right. Barbara saw more than the act. Our relationship had joy, but it also went through dark years. We drank too much. I drank far too much. There were periods when the person I became under alcohol was not the person I wanted to be. I can joke about many things. I don't joke about that. Addiction doesn't only hurt the person drinking. It changes the atmosphere of a home. It makes promises unreliable. It turns love into something that has to survive damage it never asked for. Eventually, Barbara and I reached a point where there was a choice. Keep going the way we were going, or try to become different people. We chose different. Together, rehab wasn't a glamorous chapter. Recovery isn't a glamorous word, it's repetition. One day, then another, then another. Learning how to live without the thing you once used to escape living. And doing that beside Barbara changed my life. People ask how marriages last. I don't know if I have a clever answer. I think you survive by becoming new people without becoming strangers. Barbara knew one version of me when we met. She knew another when things were bad. She knew another when we got sober. She knows the old fellow I am now. And somehow, through all those versions, we kept choosing the same table, the same home, the same life. That's extraordinary to me. The Beatles gave me a history almost nobody on earth could understand. Barbara gave me a future. There's a difference. With her, I discovered that peace isn't an idea you flash with two fingers for a photograph. Peace is waking up without chaos. Peace is trusting the person beside you. Peace is being able to remember yesterday clearly. Peace is getting older without needing every room to notice you've arrived. For a man who spent his 20s being chased down streets by crowds, that's quite a gift. And the older I get, the more I value the ordinary things. Breakfast, a walk, a phone call from family, music without pressure, a laugh that doesn't need an audience, sitting beside someone who has heard your stories 1,000 times and still let you tell them once more. That's Barbara. So if you ask me about the 5 people I love most, those are the faces that come to me. My mother, who loved me before there was anything impressive to love. Paul, who shared the impossible adventure and somehow remained part of my life after the adventure ended. John, whose laughter still exists in rooms only memory can enter. George, who reminded me that friendship could survive fame, distance, and time. And Barbara, who helped me understand that staying alive and truly living are not always the same thing. But here's the strange part about making a list like this. Love isn't really a ranking. You don't put people on a chart. There are my children, my grandchildren, friends who carried me through different seasons, musicians who became family, people I may not see every day, but who still live somewhere in the architecture of my life. 5 names can never tell the whole story. Maybe that's what age teaches you. When you're young, you count achievements. How many records did we sell? How many number ones? How many people came to the show? How big was the crowd? How far did we travel? Later, you count something else. Who called? Who stayed? Who forgave you? Who did you forgive? Who could make you laugh when the room was dark? Who knew you before the world invented a version of you? That's the real list. I've had awards, I've had applause, I've had my name written in letters bigger than the building I was standing inside. None of that can sit beside you when you're frightened. A person can. None of that can tell you you've gone too far and still help you find your way back. A person can. None of that can remember the boy you used to be. A person can. That's why at 86, I don't think of my life as a collection of records. I think of it as a collection of people. Some are still here. Some have been gone for decades. Some I can call. Some I can only visit by closing my eyes. But love does something funny to time. A person can be gone 20 years, 40 years, and then one tiny memory brings them back with perfect clarity. John laughing, George smiling, Mum waiting, Paul counting us in, Barbara reaching for my hand. For a second, you're not old anymore. You're just there. And maybe that's as close as we get to keeping anyone. People have asked me for years how I stay positive. Peace and love, peace and love. They hear the phrase so often that sometimes I think they assume it's a slogan. It isn't. Not to me. It's what remains after you've seen what anger costs. It's what remains after you've buried friends. It's what remains after you've made mistakes you cannot undo. It's what remains after you've been given another chance. You don't reach this age without regrets. Anybody who tells you they have none either wasn't paying attention or has a very creative memory. I have regrets, but I also have gratitude, and gratitude is heavier. It wins. I was a sick kid from Liverpool who missed so much school that nobody would have predicted much of anything for me. Then I got a drum kit. Then I found a band. Then the world went mad. And somehow, after all of it, the greatest part of the story isn't that people still know my name. It's that there were people who knew my heart. That's the fortune. That's the achievement. That's the part I would keep if everything else disappeared. The records can belong to history. The photographs can belong to museums. The stories can belong to documentaries. The people belong to me, and I belong to them. That's enough. Peace and love.